Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Ormson, Medical Education and Training Manager at Natus Medical. And on behalf of Natus Medical Incorporated and the Hearing and Balance Academy, welcome to today's e-seminar, Automated Verification Using Aurical and Phonak TargetMatch. A few housekeeping details before we get started. All attendees are in listen-only mode. If you have questions for our speaker, please type them into the question box and we'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation, time permitting. We're also including interactive polling during the presentation and we encourage everyone to please participate, but keep in mind that the response buttons are not active if you have your screen in full screen mode. So please avoid full screen mode and then you can respond to the polling questions directly on your computer screen. As far as CEUs, everyone in attendance will receive a certificate of attendance for 1 contact hour. But if you also included your American Academy of Audiology membership number on your registration, please be sure to go to the handouts section of the control panel and download the quiz and the course evaluation. Complete those forms and follow the directions on the form to return them to me in the time frame required, and you will receive your American Academy of Audiology CEUs. Our speaker today is Dr. Jeanette Fitzke. As Regional Field Clinical Audiologist at Natus, Dr. Fitzke provides on-site and virtual training and support to audiologists and hearing care professionals on a variety of audiology, vestibular, telehealth, and business-related topics pertinent to the hearing and balance healthcare industry. She has nearly 20 years of clinical experience in ENT, hospital, and multi-specialty clinics focusing on diagnostics, hearing aid services, vestibular care, and electrophysiology. I will now pass the presentation over to Dr. Fitzke.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you everyone for attending today. We really appreciate your viewing this presentation and active participation throughout. So as Mary mentioned, we're going to be talking about the automated verification with our Aurical system and how that correlates with the Phonak TargetMatch software. So just a little bit of information. You may be familiar with the Odometrics name. Odometrics is now moving forward as Natus. So with that, we will continue our commitment to hearing and balance care and education to stay at the forefront of the industry. So what that provides is more resources and more teamwork, all for the benefit of you, our customers, to really make sure that the products meet your needs. So I'm going to pass this back over to Mary for just a moment. We have our first polling question, so she's going to help you with that.
Thanks, Jeanette. Our first polling question, we'd like to learn a little bit more about our audience today. What best describes your practice? A few more responses are coming in, and let's have a look. It seems that the leader is hospital, ENT, and medical settings. We have a few others and several people in independent and private practice. I'll turn it back over to Jeanette. I think we might have another polling question coming up as well.
All right, thank you very much, Mary. So as we move forward, what are we going to learn about in today's webinar? Well, we're going to update you first on just the benefit overall of using probe microphone measures in the verification process of hearing aids. We're going to help you learn about how Aurical and Phonak TargetMatch work together, and we're going to demonstrate that for you so you can see the actual process. And then we're going to talk about the accuracy and the results of using TargetMatch with some research. So that does lead us to our second polling question. So again, Mary's going to help you with that.
Great, thanks, Jeanette. We'd like to know, again, more about our audience members today. Do you currently perform real ear measures for hearing aid fittings? You can see the options on the screen: always, only with pediatrics, sometimes, or no, I don't currently perform real ear measures. I think that always is a fantastic number here, that 43% of our audience members are always verifying. And we have maybe a few people that said only with pediatrics. So I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Dr. Fitzke to continue with the presentation.
All right, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for sharing that information. So now as we're going to go forward, what are the benefits of verification? So as you can see, there are several studies here cited, and just really talks about what does the patient perceive as benefit, as well as for the clinician's sake. So first, really provides consistent fitting quality because you're actually documenting the process. Customer satisfaction has been proven to be higher. Lower return rate of the hearing instruments, fewer follow-up or visits, so that's definitely a clinician benefit as well to the patient, and the patient loyalty to the clinician, and then just the patient's value perception and willingness to actually pay for the fitting care and services. And so we're going to talk about these in a little bit more detail. So kind of looking at it and why looking at maybe just verification is very important in the process. Because if we're just looking at the patient's unaided threshold sensitivity, it's really not a good predictor of the success of the patient in the hearing aid fitting process. So I'm going to look at this research in a little bit more detail here for you. So as we look at this graph here, and this was published back in 2008, and if you're looking at the blue dots there on the screen, the blue dots are patients with a mild to moderate sensorineural hearing loss. And then as you look at the red dots, those are patients that fall into the moderately severe to severe sensorineural hearing loss category. And what we're looking at with this first graph is the patient's performance on the quick SIN. So if you're looking at the graph there, going from the bottom axis all the way to the top, you will see the quick SIN score. So the lower on the graph that the patient is, the better the patient performs in noise. The higher they are in the graph, the poorer performance that they have in noise. Then what you're seeing across this bottom axis here is the patient's pure tone average at 500, 1000, and 2000 hertz. So what you'll notice here is even with those mild to moderate hearing loss patients, we have a great variability on overall patient performance and noise. And then also, if you look at those moderately severe to severe hearing loss patients, you also see just some great variability. So if you took 10 patients with the same audiogram and compared their pure tone average, really trying to say how are they going to perform in noise is going to be very hard to determine without doing some objective testing. Then if we also look at their performance in quiet, you're going to see that there's a little less variability, obviously, when it's in the mild to moderate category, where we only see about a 20% variability range. But then again, if you look at those moderately severe to severe sensorineural hearing losses, again, it's just really hard to predict the patient's overall performance. So if we look at that and how that kind of reflects onto the fitting process, if we are kind of taking the patients in this study here, and this was published back in 2018 by Valente et al., and what this study looked at was a double-blind study with 24 patients. All the patients had normal sloping to moderately severe sensorineural hearing loss. And with these patients, 12 were fit with the first fit setting of the hearing aids, and then 12 were fit with real ear measurements fit to NAL, NL2 targets. And if you look on this left-hand side, this is the patient performance in word recognition in quiet. And so if you look at the white bars here, these are the first fit patients. And then these gray bars here are the patients that were fit to the NAL, NL2 targets. So then if you look at the bottom of the graph here, you're going to see that they're looking at that at different input levels. So these are patients evaluated soft speech, average speech, and loud. And you're going to notice here where you see the greatest variability are the patients with soft speech, actually a difference of about 15%. So why is that the case? If we look at this next study here from 2015, you're going to see what we can kind of expect from the out-of-the-box fittings. So starting with this first graph on the left, these were looking at 5 different hearing aid manufacturers. And what you're looking at, this 0 dB line, is the NAL NL2 target. And then what you're seeing that here is the LTAS, or the long-term average speech spectrum, graphed relative to target. So basically, if you're above the line, it is over target, and if you're below the line, you're under target. And what you're really going to notice here is looking at the soft speech, all of the hearing aid manufacturers fall anywhere from about 3 dB all the way up to almost 15 dB below the target out to 4,000 hertz. So if we think about that previous slide and why patients may be performing so much poorer with first fit is because they're really underfit in the critical speech information area. Then if we look over here with average speech, we can see there's actually not a huge deficit here out to even almost 3,000 hertz. We're within 5 dB of the target. So if we think about that previous slide, there wasn't really much difference with average speech. But then what we're noticing here with loud speech, we're actually over target in the low to mid frequencies. So yes, that won't really affect word recognition understanding. It's actually, going to be a benefit there. But what it really will cause issues with is the patient comfort. So if we had left the patient at this setting, they may start to complain about the actual comfort in those noisy situations or louder environments. So that's why it's really important to look at what we can expect at these different input levels. Then if we look at here, this is looking at a study with Quicksin. So again, the higher the score, the worse the performance was. So what we're looking at here, the yellow is actually the first fit. The red is adjusted to an NALR target, and then the green is the difference between the first fit and the NAL REM adjusted target. So if you're looking at here, you're going to notice that there's 6 different hearing aid manufacturers. And then this actual last one on the right is an analog hearing aid. So what you're looking at initially with first fit, that the analog hearing aid actually performed better on the Quicksin than the other hearing aids just adjusted at first fit. Why is this important? Because what that shows you is technology alone will not provide the best benefit. We do also need to make sure that the gain is adjusted appropriately for the patient's hearing loss. But then the good news is once the hearing aid was adjusted to the NALR target, most of the hearing aid manufacturers actually did then perform better than the analog hearing aid. So that shows you with the technology and the proper adjustments, we can definitely see improvements. So the good news is things can get better. Then as we move on here, the main thing I want to show on this slide is the role of the hearing care professional in the process of hearing aid success. So if we focus on the real ear measurement verification and look at the patients that were below average to above average, and then in the bottom part of the performance versus the top performance, you're going to see that we can see quite a significant jump in the patients who are in the above average category from receiving the real ear measurement verification. So really what this highlights is that REM is one of the key differences between the patients that are highly satisfied to those that are really not satisfied with their hearing aids at all. So it's not simply about completing more steps, but making sure that you're following the accurate steps and the steps that are really part of the best fitting practices process. Also looking at this, this is actually something I think that comes more into light, even of more importance today, is about the efficiency of the fitting process. So on this slide, we're actually showing what's the difference of the number of visits that the patient will typically receive when different parts of the best practices fitting process is followed. So what you're going to see on the far right here, where you see the 3.57, those are patients that had no verification or validation of the hearing aids. Then as we move to the 2.82 graph, that's patient that was verified only. Then the 2.55 is validation only. And then when we fall over here to the 2.41, this is where verification and validation were completed together. So even though today we're focusing on the real year measures as part of the verification process, just please bear in mind that that's not the only part of the fitting process. Validation is still a very important part of the fitting care. So basically why this is even more of an impact today, really as we think about our current climate and situation, if we can reduce the number of inpatient visits for the patient, we can reduce some of the risk of exposure for the patient and the clinician themselves. So it's really important to think about how can we provide the best care in the most effective means. Then just kind of wrapping this up a little bit, looking at the Amlani study from 2016. This is one of my favorite studies because it actually looked at the patient's willingness to actually receive audiological services and pay for those services. So this wasn't really related to the hearing instruments. This is what the hearing care professional can actually provide to the patient. So if we look at this bottom information here, you'll see that the patient was actually much more willing to pay for the audiological care when they actually received real ear measurement services. So if you really want to see some of the details of these studies that we've talked about, all of these are referenced at the bottom of each slide. So please feel free to look back at any of those sources to get more in-depth knowledge of the actual studies. So that's going to take us to our next polling question. So again, I'm just going to pass it over to Mary.
Thanks, Jeanette. If you are performing real ear measures, which system are you using? Thank you. So it looks like a majority of the participants, Jeanette, are using Aurical FreeFit. And then we have some MedRex and VeriFit. And of course, we understood some people are not currently performing real ear measures. Thank you, everyone, for providing us with that feedback. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. So kind of moving on, how can Aurical kind of deliver some of these improvements for verification? So as we know, with verification, we can definitely provide a more individual and precise hearing instrument fitting. And as we talked about in some of those previous studies, that can reduce the overall visits that the patient receives. The patient is more satisfied and less returns with the hearing aids, but also most important is it's really showing consistent care to the patient, and that's documented throughout the process. So what that will drive for you as a clinician is customer loyalty with referrals and word of mouth, which is in my opinion, when I was in the clinic, one of the greatest gifts when a patient would refer someone else to me and really be satisfied with the care that I provided, and that will help to strengthen your overall business. So why is verification underutilized? Sounds like a lot of you guys are verifying, so that's fantastic. But why are some clinicians maybe leery of, kind of following some of these best practices? Sometimes it's, a little more complex, and really going through all the manual adjustments can be a little kind of, intimidating. Also, when you look at the hearing aid manufacturers, there's proprietary fitting algorithms versus our, evidence-based, NAL and our DSL targets. Also, in the beginning, when you're first, learning how to place a probe tube, it can be a little unnerving. Sometimes you're afraid I might bump the patient's eardrum, make the patient uncomfortable, and am I doing that correctly? Also, it may add a little bit of time initially to the fitting visit. And then also just the extra time and expertise and CEU follow-ups and things we have to do to make sure we're fresh on all of that information. So how can we close that gap in today's fitting environments? Well, the good news is there is now something called intermodule communication, which allows hearing aid software and real ear measurement software to communicate and work together. It's not just about toggling between screens or data, but there's actually a true data sharing, which allows those two devices to exchange real-time information to actually allow for control of the real ear measurement device, even when you're within the hearing aid manufacturer software. So what does that allow you to do with Aurical? It will allow you to open the hearing instrument manufacturing software and actually do all of the verification right from the Phonak software. When you get done, those results will be stored either in the Phonak software or in the OtoSuite software. So you can view those results wherever you need to. Calculates the best response because you can actually use proprietary fitting algorithms as well as the NAL or DSL targets. And you can also select the option to do automatic gain and output adjustments based on the information being received. So by combining these two steps together, it can really improve the process of completing these measurements and really help to utilize your time efficiently. So what are the requirements for TargetMatch? So as Mary asked in the poll question just a little bit ago, it does require the Aurical FreeFit hardware and or the Aurical HIT hearing instrument test box to do the measurements. For the Phonak Target software, you want to have version 6.1 or higher. And then for the OtoSuite software, you want to have 4.83 or higher. And then as you can see for NOAA, you want to be at least at 4.4 with the build 2280. Now, even though these are the minimum levels of software you need to have, it is always recommended to update your software to the latest version. Some other things just to keep in mind is you do want to make sure that your equipment is also receiving the annual calibration. If it is not up to date on calibration, you will not be able to use the TargetMatch. Also, if you aren't sure of the versions of the software that you're using, you can open up the Phonak or the OtoSuite software and look at the help and about to look and verify the versions that you are using. So what is Aurical? Aurical is our fitting hardware. So there are actually two parts to that. So one thing that's really unique about our system is that the real ear measurement or the probe microphone measurement system is separated from the hearing instrument test box. So the Aurical FreeFit is the probe microphone measurement system, and then the Aurical HIT is the test box system. Those do run off of our OtoSuite software platform, which can be used with or without NOAA, so that you can have that data storage and work with your different hearing aid software very efficiently. So what are the hardware elements for a probe microphone measurement system? And this is going to be just beyond ours. These are just some basic hardware requirements for the real ear system. So for our system, you are going to see a FreeFit collar that does have the probes on it. So that is wireless. So there is no wire from the device to the patient. Then you're going to see a speaker. So this blue underneath here, if you take off the cover, there is the free field speaker. On the probe itself, there will be the reference microphone and the probe tube that attaches to the probe itself. Then just some other notes with the Aurical system. It is wireless, so it does have a Bluetooth dongle to communicate to the FreeFit collar that is proprietary. And it does have a rechargeable battery inside so that you can put it on the charger when not in use. What is the Aurical hearing instrument test box? It can be used for coupler-based fittings as well as ANSI measurements and as well as advanced feature verification of the hearing aids. Now, one thing that's really nice and unique about the HIT and the PMM with Phonak is you can use either in the Phonak TargetMatch software. So now if we compare the HIT box, you're going to see it's basically the same components, but putting them in a box. So I always think of it as like taking the patient's ear and putting it in a box to do the same thing that you would do for real ear measurements. So you're going to see here, this is taking the place of the PMM speaker. Now this is the HIT speaker. This is your reference microphone that you saw on the probe for the real ear system. Then this here is going to be the 2cc coupler. So, taking the place of the ear canal. And then the coupler mic, which you can't see because it's down into there, is taking the place of basically the probe tube. And then you are going to attach the hearing aid to that coupler based via a hearing aid coupler adapter. And that coupler adapter will be different whether you're using a traditional ear hook BTE or if you're using a RIC or a custom hearing aid. And then you will see if you do want to test things like battery drain, there is a spot to plug in battery pills. So what is TargetMatch with Phonak Target? Basically what it is, it's really a wizard-driven workflow. It's going to guide you through the process of doing the fitting steps. So you're going to go all the way from doing the unaided response to the aided response of the measurement. Now, just so you know, when you're working inside TargetMatch, you can use any fitting target supported by Phonak. So you can use the Phonak Adaptive Digital, you can use the DSL, or you can use the NAL. It works with all Phonak hearing instruments from January of 2015 and onwards. So what does that mean? That would be your Belong platform, the Marvel, and then the Venture platform. So any of those instruments are going to be compatible with using this process. And then, as I said, one thing that's very exciting is you can do this on the ear or in the test box. So if you are working a lot with pediatrics, or in this climate now where we're also doing a lot of fittings, maybe without the patient in the office and want to minimize some contact, you could do some of those pre-programming of the hearing aid with the Phonak TargetMatch in the test box. So that is something that came out in 2017 to be able to also use the test box in the workflow. So as we talked about in TargetMatch, it's going to take you through basically 3 different steps. The first one is going to be probe tube placement and the unaided gain response measurement. The second is going to do some on-ear acoustic transformation measurements. And step 3 is going to actually do the target matching to the aided responses. We're going to talk about each of these in a little bit more detail, and then we're going to show a video that goes through that process. So where do you go to in the software to prepare to do this? You're going to connect to your hearing instruments as you normally would, and then when you get into the fitting, you're going to go to the fitting screen. You're going to go to global tuning. You're going to set your fitting formula, and then you're going to set your adaptation level. And then as soon as you've made those adjustments, you'll go to the tab that says Target Match. And then that will take you through the guided workflow. So Adaptive Phonak Digital, what is it? What does it do? It takes into account the microphone location effect, the real ear to coupler difference, and the real ear unaided gain. So it's an estimated RACD within Phonak Target. The gain and compression settings are based on the hearing loss configuration. So that result really guides you to an individualized fitting pre-calculation. So it will have an estimated based on without taking any of these assumptions into account, and then give you a more individualized target. So Adaptive Phonak Digital, why use it? Basically, as we talked about, it really customizes the fit to the patient, and it has been proven through research that patients do prefer it. And like we said, now with TargetMatch, you can verify against that. So if we look at this graph here, this is basically looking at DSL here in this column, Adaptive Phonak Digital in this column, and then NAL, NL2. And it's looking at the differences of the hearing loss and the target amplification. So when we start at the top, we're starting with mild hearing losses here. Then we're going to moderate hearing losses here, and then severe to profound. And basically, if we look at the mild hearing loss patients with Adaptive Phonak Digital, you're going to see that there's more of an emphasis for soft and moderate high frequency signals versus NL2 and the DSL. For the moderate hearing loss patients, you're going to notice that they're pretty similar to the NL2 with the speech frequencies being emphasized, but just a little less compression with the Adaptive Phonak Digital. Then when you look to the severe to profound loss patients with the Adaptive Phonak Digital, you're going to see that the speech frequencies are really emphasized, where there's really reduced gain, where we assume that maybe the auditory function is lacking. So we're really trying to channel the power into the ranges where the severe to profound patients can use it and really contribute to their overall loudness perception and prescribe that gain accordingly. So if we look here, sorry, my arrow went away. This is the Adaptive Phonak Digital, so you can see that extra emphasis there, but then really kind of rolling off in the higher frequencies. Whereas if you look at the NAL, NL2 targets, you're going to see we don't see that same roll off. And then again, also with the DSL. So that's some of the differences. And if you really want to get more information on this, I would definitely reach out to your local Phonak trainer. And then also Phonak Pro has more information to go into more detail on this. So how do you initiate TargetMatch? So as I said, after you do those pre-setup screens in the software and hit on the TargetMatch, this is the next screen that's going to appear. So basically from here, you're going to select, am I doing it with the Aurical FreeFit with the real ear measurements or the probe microphone measurements, or am I using the Aurical HIT or the test box to obtain these results? Now, if you are doing this with children, it is recommended that you use traditional RECD measurements first with the OtoSuite and then manually enter them into the Target software. After you do that, after you decide if you're doing it on the ear, you will see that this screen pops up to do guided probe tube placement. So what this is, it's on-screen step-by-step instructions that will guide you on putting the probe tube into the patient's ear. So you can actually use the on and the off button on the FreeFit device to advance. So what does that look like on the screen? You can actually view the REUG or the real ear unaided gain response, as well as this guided measurement here on the side. When you see a number here, this is basically telling you how many more millimeters is recommended for you to push the probe tube into the ear. So what they're doing through this process is they're looking at the natural resonant peak as well as the negative deflection on the unaided gain response. Now, there will be some patients that this process is not recommended to use the probe tube placement. We recommend not until the patient is over 10 years old, and as well as we wouldn't want to use it with a surgically altered ear. You could still use Phonak TargetMatch, but you just wouldn't use the guided probe tube placement part of this. This is something you can uncheck in the software to not use it. So what are you going to see as you do it across the screen? Like I said, if you see the number, that means that you need to push that probe that much further. If you see the green check mark here, that means that you've actually achieved the proper depth. And then if you see that orange exclamation mark, that means that something isn't allowing it to measure accurately. That is most common maybe if you're standing right next to the patient or you still have your hand by the patient's ear. You're going to block the sound field and the equipment's not going to be able to make that measurement. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that because that really comes up a lot when I'm training. Why am I seeing some of these things? So what does this help with for newer clinicians, especially that aren't yet maybe confident in placing the probe tube? This really addresses one of the main reasons that people may feel uncomfortable with placing the probe tube into the patient's ear, because there are safeguards with this to help avoid hitting the patient's tympanic membrane. Then after we have placed the probe tube, we move on to obtain the acoustic transformation measurements. What are those? Those are the RECD, the real ear occluded gain response, and the microphone location effect. So through this process, it's going to use the hearing aid as a high impedance transducer to obtain the on-ear RECD. The microphone location effect is completed via microphone check simultaneously on both ears. And then while the RECD running, you may wonder why it's not producing any sounds from the speaker. The patient will be hearing that sound during this testing. It is important while this testing is being done to remain quiet in the environment so these responses can be obtained accurately. What will this provide? This is going to help provide those individualized targets, which is really, as we showed in some of those previous screens, crucial for that adaptive Phonak digital foundation. Then after we have measured those on-ear acoustic transformations, we're going to move on to the actual measurement of the target. So this is what you can think of as the aided response. And you'll see on the screen here, you actually have the options to pick which program you want to measure that against, as well as how do you want it to measure and match to those targets. Do I want to let it automatically match? Do I want to manually match? Or do I just want to measure the responses? And then you'll notice down here in the bottom, it will remind you what are your global tuning settings. So before you get started, if you notice this isn't where you want the settings to be, you would go ahead and hit cancel and then go back to your global tuning screen to adjust these things. This is showing you the automatic fitting option. So if I had, picked to let it automatically match for the aided response targets, what's going to happen is it's going to measure the responses and then automatically work to match to the prescriptive target for the soft, average, and loud speech targets using the International Speech Test Signal, or ISTS. What you're going to notice then on the screen is you're going to see a solid line, which was the original prescribed target, which is hard to see in the screen because it's overlaid. Then you're going to see a dotted line, which was the individualized target using those acoustic transformation measurements. And then the darker line that you see in the red and the blue are going to be the actual measured responses, or as you can think of them, as that LTAS response. Then you're going to see that they are measured at the different input levels for soft, average, and loud speech. Now, as I said, this data, once you're complete, will get stored in your Phonak target software. It will get stored in the OtoSuite software, as well as your NOAA database if you're running through NOAA. So what does it look like? We're going to go ahead and put that in action and let you see. So I'm going to play this video for you. So what you saw there very momentarily is you saw the OtoSuite software opening in the background, but then it goes away. You don't see it actively. Then we went ahead and did a probe tube check, and now you can see that we're doing that guided probe tube placement. So it's doing the right ear first. You can see that unaided response curve change as we get to that green check mark. Now it's just going to measure the REUG for data storage. And one thing that you'll notice as it goes through this process is it will unmute and mute the hearing aids at the appropriate times. So you won't think about having to do that inside the hearing aid software. So now that the unaided responses are complete, it's going to tell you are both hearing aids inserted into the ear. And once they are, you're going to go ahead and hit continue. So it's giving you time to put the hearing aids in and just giving you that gentle reminder to put the hearing aids on. So now as you see, the first thing it's going to do is run those acoustic transformations. And you're going to see that it's constantly remeasuring the ambient noise throughout this process. And the reason is we really want to make sure the results are accurate throughout the process. So as it's finishing up there, what you're really looking for is to see if you've got these green check marks there. If you see any exclamation marks, you can get more detail. Where you will sometimes see, if you open up the details, is at 250 hertz. There might be a little bit of ambient noise, but typically it's only about 3 to 4 dB, and it's not enough to impact the fitting. If it was too significant, it wouldn't allow us to advance, and the continue button wouldn't be there. So now as we move on, it's just doing a first measurement of the soft, average, and loud sounds. And then it's going to go back and work to match to those targets after it's measured, the initial. So if we had done measure only, it wouldn't go back to this matching process. So now you see it's going back to soft speech. So the green active line you see is what's actively being measured. And you can see that adjusting to the dotted line there in the video to get as close to target as possible. Now, one thing I always recommend is I would recommend doing your feedback test first before you do any of the target match, because you want to make sure you're not going to run into feedback limitations at the time you're doing these measurements. So then what you're going to see here, it tells you that everything was successfully measured, and then you see your final results. So that takes us to our next polling question. So again, I'm going to just turn it over to Mary for just a moment.
Thanks, Jeanette. So we're curious how many people in our audience today are currently using Phonak TargetMatch, or perhaps have used it previously at other locations. Okay. Well, this is great. It shows that 67% of you in the audience are not currently using Phonak TargetMatch. So you're learning about something that you're not currently using, which I think is very helpful. Thanks for sharing that. And that brings us to our second to the last polling question. So with what you know right now, how would you rate the benefit of Phonak TargetMatch software with what you know up to now in today's presentation? And it's good that many of you are not familiar with it. Okay, I'm going to close that poll and share the results. And so far, Jeanette, I think you've been somewhat influential in your description, or at least very clear in your description, because more than half, just over half of our attendees think the Phonak TargetMatch software would be extremely beneficial, and followed by somewhat beneficial, just at 26%.
Fantastic. So what I want to do now is actually show you some of the data around the benefits of Phonak TargetMatch. So this is a study that looked at 10 hearing instrument users, and their mean age was about 44 years, and this is showing you their average audiogram. So as you can see, they're looking at the audiogram, they were in the moderate to severe hearing loss. All of these patients were experienced hearing aid users with the Bolero V70P. So looking at this data in more detail of what they obtained, what they were looking at was the accuracy of Phonak TargetMatch versus a manual fit process. So what we're looking at over here, if you look at the green here, that's going to be the TargetMatch relative to the 0 dB target line. And then this maroon color that you see here is the manual fit process. So if you look across the graph here and looking at this 0 dB line, you can see basically from about 300 hertz all the way out to about 3100 hertz, we're almost at 0 dB there for the target match. And then if you look all the way out to 4000 hertz, you see that the target is within 3 dB across the fitting range for target match. When we look at the manual fit process, you can see there's a little bit more variability from the target match. So what that shows you is that you can see that using the Phonak target match, you can achieve that target setting very well. This is looking at that data a little bit more separated out, just showing you that the individualized versus the clean graph that you just saw. Then if we look through here, you're going to see that this is a little bit more data looking at the accuracy across different coupling measures. So what they looked at is open fits versus power domes. And what you can see across all of these different coupling measures and even the ear mold, there was still very little variability from the Phonak target match. So what you can feel confident about, no matter whether you're using a dome or an ear mold, the accuracy really doesn't change, and you're actually within about 2 dB up to 4000 hertz with these different couplings. So the test and retest reliability is very great with the Phonak target match. So this information is published in the Hearing Review, September 2017, with the initial study coming out in 2016. So what this really showed is that the TargetMatch with the integrated workflow outperformed the traditional non-integrated REM fittings in terms of matching target and test and retest reliability. Now, it is important that you would still validate those results as we've shown as well through different methods that you use in your clinic. So just this is kind of summarizing and wrapping it up. There are benefits not only to the client, but also to the hearing care professional. As we talked about, it really gives you a quick and efficient way to follow best clinical practices. And that's going to optimize the fitting for your patient to have the best listening experience. And as we're talking about, that can really reduce the number of times the patient needs to come back to your office for follow-up care. And then the patient satisfaction and loyalty has been proven time and time again with the Market Track 8 studies and other studies out there about the patient benefit with the fitting experience. So with the Aurical, you're going to have the automation, which leads to less effort across the process because it's automated through the hearing instrument software. So you're not having to open different software platforms throughout the process. And it's going to give you those step-by-step screen guidances on following the process. So especially if you're newer to verification, that can make the process a little bit easier for you. And it's also consistent because you can use the hearing aid manufacturer proprietary fitting algorithm and verify against that fitting target. And then the audiogram gets pulled from NOAA, so that data is easily accessible in the fitting process. So kind of summarizing, where does the TargetMatch really help you? Like I said, you can compare apples to apples instead of apples to oranges with those fitting targets and algorithms. You can help, gain your confidence through the fitting process. And it gives you real-time information on how you're inserting that probe tube into the ear and automating the steps so that it makes it easy, not going back and forth between different software platforms, and improve just the overall fitting quality with those on-ear acoustic transformation measurements, which really individualizes the target to maximize adaptive Phonak digital if you're using that fitting algorithm. And as we said, it's going to continue to monitor the environment for any ambient noise. So that's going to make sure that the results that you're obtaining are accurate to that patient. And it's really something unique with Phonak that you can do this basically on the patient's ear with the free fit, or you can do it in the test box. So it gives you different platforms and tools to use this with the Phonak software. So that's going to take us to our last polling question of the day. And this is actually just the same polling question you saw just a moment ago. So I'm going to let Mary help you with the question here.
Thanks, Jeanette. So after hearing more about the evidence that was just presented by Jeanette, has that changed your opinion on how you would rate the benefits of Phonak TargetMatch software? Well, Jeanette, I don't know if you've ever considered being an influencer or not, but it seems that you are very influential with your the descriptions of the evidence-based research supporting Phonak TargetMatch software.
Fantastic. I'm always one that liked to see the data. So that's how I kind of worked in the clinic, is show me the data and the research behind it to really validate what you're, kind of the claims and the statements. So that's why I really appreciate sharing that with all of you so that you can see that benefit. Now, just to remind you, as far as using TargetMatch, this is a picture of the current Marvel family. So you can see it is compatible with any style of hearing instrument, as well as the older platforms with the Venture and the Belong chip as well. So you can use that with anything that you see here on the screen, as well as those two older platform versions as well. So a lot of flexibility for you in your clinic. So if you have any questions, we're going to have a little bit of time for Q&A here. I'll turn on my webcam so you can see me and ask some questions. But I wanted to provide you my email address here. So as you can see on the screen there, it's my first name, which is JEANETTE, period, and then my last name, Fitzke, FITZKE @natus.com. Now, if you have more specific questions on the Phonak software and the Phonak hearing aid options, please reach out to your local Phonak team to assist you and provide any answers that you need on those products or any more information as well. So I really just overall want to thank you for your time and attention today and all your active participation in the polling questions. But now I'm going to turn it over to Mary to go into the Q&A and see if there's any questions that we can answer for you before we finish up today. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Jeanette. And we do have about 8 minutes remaining, which is fantastic. We have some time for some dialogue. And just as a reminder, if you have questions, everyone still is muted in the meeting room, so please type your questions into the question box. We'll answer as many as possible, time permitting. So we'll go ahead with our first question. We have a question from one attendee wondering about NOAA. Is it required that you utilize the Aurical and Phonak TargetMatch with NOAA, or can it be used without NOAA?
You do need to use NOAA because of the intermodule communication for the actual TargetMatch. Now, if you were doing them manually, you could use them with the standalone software versions.
Okay, thank you. Another question, is there or are there any studies utilizing TargetMatch with average RECDs?
Not to my knowledge. That's something I can definitely look into with the Phonak team and see if they have more information on that.
Okay. I've worked mostly in a hospital environment doing hearing testing and feel that I'm running a little behind in my knowledge. Can you recommend some reading to catch up more on hearing aids? And I'm assuming hearing aids with appropriate verification.
Yeah, there are several textbooks out there. There is Gus Mueller. Honestly, the name escapes me at the moment. I can definitely look that up if you want to email me after the seminar. Oh, thank you. Yep, that's exactly the one I was talking about. So the speech mapping and probe microphone measurements. So you got Mueller, Ricketts, and Bentler that have all published that book. It's one of the most recent books out there, and it's really a great handbook if you're just getting started. The other thing you can do is also look at online webinars. So if you go to our Hearing and Balance Academy or Audiology Online, you can watch any of those courses and kind of just look at some of the basics to get more comfortable.
Another question, how many frequencies does TargetMatch aim to hit target? How many frequencies is it covering, I guess is what the question is.
Yeah, I know in the studies that I showed, they're really looking out to 4,000 hertz. So does it measure beyond there? Yes, but they're really looking to stay within that 3 dB from about 300 hertz to 4,000 hertz. That's where they're focusing on for that accuracy. Now, some of the things that could affect that is if you have sound recover on, that's going to affect. So if you suddenly see a roll off in the higher frequencies, just check that out and make sure that that's not on at the time you run it. Or if it is on, then you know why it's being cut off.
Okay. Do you have to manually set for open REM, or is this set based on the dome or mold type set in Target?
So it's going to do those on-ear acoustic transformation measurements. So with that, it's going to do the real ear occluded gain response. So that's going to be similar to what you're probably doing with the manual process in the Aurical software, so in OtoSuite, where you do an open REM calibration.
And we have one comment. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Will this be available with other manufacturers?
We have it with Resound. We also have it with Signia, and then we also have it with Oticon.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Does Natus FreeFit support real ear aided response, REAR, measurements and setting to target based on that?
So you're talking independent of the Phonak software, doing it manually?
That's all I have in the question, sorry.
Okay. So if you are using just OtoSuite alone with the Aurical FreeFit, yes, you can do everything from the unaided response, the occluded response, to the aided response, as well as the advanced feature verification. We just showed it through the Phonak software today.
Okay. So let's see, do you feel attempting to match targets on an in-the-ear hearing aid or ear mold while there's a slit leak significantly reduces the accuracy of the measure?
So are you in relation to TargetMatch? So if we looked back at that one, at the study where it showed different acoustic couplings, where you saw the open dome versus power dome versus an ear mold, you saw that the accuracy was very similar across those different coupling measures.
So that will end our presentation today. I'd like to thank everyone for joining our meeting. It was fantastic to see so many attendees listening in, and I hope everyone came away with some new knowledge and learning. And please check out the Hearing and Balance Academy. We look forward to seeing you again in another meeting room. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeanette.